My name is Cora Sterling. For the 32 years I've been on this earth, I have felt like a boat untethered from its mooring, drifting on a current I didn't choose. My anchor, my mother, was lost to a sudden illness 5 years ago, and my connection to the shore, my father, was a frayed rope I'd cut myself a year after that. Now I live in Portland, Oregon, a city of bridges and rain, where the persistent gray skies often feel like a reflection of my own inner landscape. I work as a freelance graphic designer, finding solace in the clean lines and controlled palettes of my digital world, a stark contrast to the messy, unresolved colors of my past. My apartment is a small, sparsely furnished space overlooking the Willamette River. I chose it for the view, for the constant, quiet movement of the water that reminds me that even stillness is a form of motion. It's here that I've built a life of careful, deliberate solitude. It's not loneliness, not exactly. It's a self-imposed quarantine of the soul, a way to keep the infection of my family's history from spreading further into my own. The package arrived on my birthday, a day I prefer to let pass with minimal acknowledgement. It was a simple brown box, tied with a plain blue ribbon. The handwriting on the label, precise and severe, made my breath catch in my throat. Elias Sterling. My father. After 6 years of complete and total silence, his name felt like a ghost rattling the door. I left the box on my kitchen counter for a full hour, treating it like an unexploded ordnance. I made tea. I stared out at the Fremont Bridge, watching the cars glide across its arches like beads on a string. What could he possibly want? Our last conversation had been a sterile, brutal thing, a final severing. I had chosen a life he deemed frivolous, a life of art and uncertainty over the rigid, predictable path he had laid for me. "You are a disappointment," he had said, his voice as flat and final as a tombstone. And that was that. Finally, driven by a curiosity that felt like a betrayal of my own hard-won peace, I slit the tape with a paring knife. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a small, handwritten card. "Happy birthday, Cora. Let's begin again." The words were an offering, but they felt like a demand. Beneath the card lay the source of a deep, unsettling confusion. A dozen perfectly formed shortbread cookies, each one decorated with an impossibly intricate lacework of royal icing, tiny blue forget-me-nots blooming on a field of white. I stared at them, my mind struggling to reconcile the object with its creator. Elias Sterling did not bake. He was a man of discipline and order, a former architect who believed emotion was a structural flaw. He measured love in achievements and punishment in measured, cutting silences. The man who had once lectured me for a full hour on the moral failings implied by AB+ in trigonometry was not a man who piped delicate flowers onto cookies. The gesture was so alien, so profoundly out of character, that it felt more like a threat than a truce. I should have thrown them away. I should have walked them down to the communal trash bin and let them be buried under the refuse of a dozen other lives. But I couldn't. They were a question I didn't know how to answer, and to discard them felt like refusing to even hear it. Instead, I thought of my sister. My phone lit up with a text from Lena just as the thought formed. "Happy birthday, old woman. Finn wants to sing to you." Attached was a blurry video of my 7-year-old nephew, his face a mess of chocolate and joy, belting out a chaotic but heartfelt rendition of the birthday song. A genuine smile, a rare and fragile thing, touched my lips. I looked at the box of immaculate, unnerving cookies and then back at my phone. On impulse, I typed back. "I was thinking of driving out. I have something for you guys." The reply was immediate. "Finn will explode with happiness. Come." An hour later, the box of cookies sat on the passenger seat of my car like a silent, judgmental passenger. The drive to the suburbs was a journey from my world back into one I had only ever visited. Lena's house was a burst of cheerful, chaotic life. Wind chimes made of seashells clinked on the porch, the driveway was a canvas of chalk-drawn monsters and rockets, and a slightly deflated soccer ball sat expectantly in the green grass of the lawn. After our mother died, Lena and I had cleaved. She had leaned into life, creating the warm, loving home we'd never had. I had retreated, building fortress walls around my heart. "Aunt Cora." Finn launched himself at me the moment I stepped out of the car, wrapping his arms around my legs. He had my mother's warm, brown eyes, and he looked up at me with an unnerving perception. "You look tired. Is it because you're 32 now?" Lena appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Finn, boundaries," she said, but she was smiling. At 30, she already had the faint, lovely lines of a life fully lived etched around her eyes. "Happy birthday, Cor." We hugged, a brief, fierce embrace that said everything we couldn't. I held up the box. "I brought a peace offering. Or a mystery. I'm not sure which." Inside, as Lena made coffee, I explained. "Dad sent them." Her eyebrows shot up over the rim of her coffee mug. "Our dad? The man who once declared sugar to be a failure of the will sent you cookies." "The very same," I said, opening the box and sliding it across the polished wood of her kitchen table. She peered inside, her expression a mirror of my own confusion. "Wow. They're beautiful. But this is just weird, Cora." "It feels wrong." "That's what I thought," I admitted. "It's like getting a sonnet from a spreadsheet." Finn, drawn by the allure of the forbidden, appeared at the table. "Can I have one, Mom? Please? They're the prettiest cookies in the world." Lena hesitated, her gaze flickering to me. "They're your aunt's birthday present." I pushed the box toward them. "Please take them." "I'm not going to eat them. They're just going to sit in my apartment and mock me with their mysterious perfection." "Are you sure?" "Positive," I said, and the relief in my voice was genuine. "Consider it my gift to you." Regifting from a man I barely know anymore. Finn needed no further encouragement. He grabbed a cookie shaped like a perfect five-pointed star and took a huge bite, his eyes closing in bliss. They taste like honey," he mumbled through a shower of crumbs. "And flowers." After a moment, Lena, her curiosity overriding her suspicion, tried one herself. She chewed thoughtfully. "He's right. They're actually amazing." "I don't understand." "This isn't him. People don't just change like this." "Maybe they do," I suggested, the words tasting like a lie. "Not him," she said softly, her voice certain. "Not without a reason." We spent the afternoon in a bubble of fragile normalcy. Lena talked about her work at the local library. Finn showed me his burgeoning collection of agates, and for a few hours, I felt the ice around my heart begin to thaw. By the time I left, the sky was a bruised purple and the cookie box was half empty. Finn had devoured 3, and Lena had nibbled on a second. "Call me tomorrow?" Lena asked as she hugged me at the door. "Promise," I said, squeezing her hand, the warmth of her home clinging to me like a borrowed coat. The next morning, I was standing in my kitchen, watching the river flow, when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I knew. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice more steady than I felt. "Hello." "Cora." His voice. It was exactly as I remembered, deep, controlled, with an undercurrent of something that always felt like judgment. "Did you receive my gift?" "I did," I said, my hand tightening on my mug. "Thank you." It was unexpected. There was a pause, and in it, I could hear an unnerving eagerness. "And? Did you enjoy them?" My instincts, honed by years of navigating his moods, flared like 1,000 tiny alarms. Something was wrong. The question was too pointed, too focused. "Actually," I said, forcing a casual tone, "I'm not much for sweets these days." I took them over to Lena and Finn. They absolutely loved them. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a dense, heavy thing, crackling with unseen energy. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its careful control and filled with a raw, terrifying fury. "You did what?" The 3 words hit me with physical force. I flinched, pulling the phone away from my ear. "They're just cookies, Dad," I said, a defensive anger rising in me. "What is the big deal?" "They were not for them," he hissed, the sound like scraping metal. "They were for you. Only for you." The line went dead. I stood frozen in the quiet of my apartment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my bones. He hadn't been angry. He had been horrified. I called Lena. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. My heart began to pound a frantic, suffocating rhythm against my ribs. I grabbed my keys, my purse, and ran, the echo of his rage chasing me out the door. The drive was a blur of traffic laws ignored and frantic prayers whispered into the sterile air of my car. When I reached Lena's house, the front door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. A wave of nausea washed over me. Lena was meticulous about locking her doors. "Lena," I called, my voice thin and reedy in the sudden, oppressive silence of the house. "Finn." A faint sound, a low moan, drew me toward the back of the house. I found them in the living room. Lena was curled on the floor, pale and shivering, a sheen of sweat on her forehead. Finn was lying on the couch, listless, his face chalky white. The half-eaten box of cookies sat on the coffee table, an altar to my catastrophic mistake. "Cora," Lena whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Something's wrong. Finn, he started getting sick in the night. I thought it was the flu. We need to get you to a hospital," I said, my own voice shaking as I helped her to her feet. She was frighteningly weak. "It's the cookies," she managed to say, her eyes locking on mine, filled with a dawning horror that mirrored my own. "It has to be. It's the only thing." As I helped her out to the car, the full weight of it crashed down on me. The cookies weren't a peace offering. They were a weapon. And I, in my careless attempt to offload my own discomfort, had handed that weapon to the two people I loved most in the entire world. The antiseptic smell of the hospital felt like an accusation. I paced the waiting room, the squeak of my shoes on the linoleum a frantic counterpoint to the steady, agonizing tick of the wall clock. Guilt was a physical thing, a heavy cloak pressing down on my shoulders, stealing my breath. A doctor with tired eyes and a kind face finally approached me. "Are you the family of Lena and Finn Sterling?" "Yes," I said quickly. "I'm her sister, his aunt." "How are they?" "Your nephew is stable. He's dehydrated, but we have him on N4. His age and smaller size meant the symptoms appeared faster, which was a blessing in disguise. Your sister is more concerning. Her symptoms are more severe." "What is it? What's wrong with them?" My voice cracked on the last word. "The labs are still pending, but the symptoms, cardiac arrhythmia, severe gastrointestinal distress, neurological effects, are consistent with some form of cardiotoxic poisoning," the doctor said, his eyes watchful. "Do you have any idea what they might have ingested in the last 24 hours? The truth lodged in my throat, sharp and painful. To say it out loud would be to condemn my own father, to put voice to a monstrous possibility. But Lena and Finn were lying in hospital beds because of my silence. "Cookies," I said, the word tasting like ash. "My father sent them to me for my birthday. I gave them to them." The doctor's expression didn't change, but a new sharpness entered his eyes. "We'll need to run a full toxicology screen. The hospital is required to notify the police in cases of suspected poisoning." I just nodded, unable to speak. "The police." "Of course." A detective arrived less than an hour later. His name was Miles Russo, a man younger than I expected, with calm, observant gray eyes that seemed to see more than I was willing to show. He listened to my story in a small, windowless consultation room, his face impassive. "So you're saying you believe your father, who you haven't spoken to in 6 years, mailed you poisoned cookies as a birthday gift?" he asked, his tone neutral but laced with professional skepticism. "I know how it sounds," I said, frustration making my voice shake. "But he called this morning. When I told him I gave the cookies to Lena and Finn, he was enraged. He said they were meant only for me." Detective Russo made a note. "We'll need the cookies for analysis. We'll also need your father's contact information. We'll pay him a visit, but Miss Sterling, you need to be prepared. Without concrete evidence linking him directly, this is just a family dispute with a very unfortunate coincidence." I left the station feeling hollowed out, but a new, cold resolve was beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. If the police wouldn't act, I would. I had to understand. I had to know why. That evening, I drove north, deep into the Cascade foothills where Elias had retired. His house was a stark, modern structure of glass and cedar, perched on a bluff overlooking a churning river. It was a fortress of solitude, deliberately isolated. I parked down the road and approached on foot, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The house was dark, his car gone. The back door, to my surprise, was unlocked. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of dried herbs and antiseptic. The home was as meticulously ordered as the man himself. But the order was unnerving. In his study, one wall was lined not with books on architecture, but with volumes on botany, pharmacology, and toxicology. On his desk, several antique herbals were laid open, their pages filled with delicate, terrifying illustrations of plants: foxglove, monk's hood, nightshade. In the kitchen, I found what chilled me to the bone. On a set of open shelves were dozens of small, cork-stoppered glass vials, each one neatly labeled in my father's precise script. Some held dried leaves and flowers, others dark liquids or fine powders. But it wasn't the plants that terrified me. It was a second set of labels, smaller ones, tied to some of the vials with twine. Helen, Lena, Cora. My mother's name. My sister's. My own. My breath hitched. I backed away, bumping into a small bookshelf. A framed photograph fell to the floor, the glass shattering. I picked it up. It was an old, faded picture of two children, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been more than 10. They were clearly twins, with the same serious eyes and sharp jawline. The boy was unmistakably a young Elias. I had never seen the girl before. On the back, in faint pencil, was a single name: Rosalind. 1978. Who is Rosalind? I had no aunt, no cousin by that name. A sudden noise, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I slipped the photograph into my pocket, my mind racing. On my way out, an impulse made me open a drawer in his desk. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a silver locket. My name, Cora, was engraved on the front. I snapped it open. Inside wasn't a space for a picture, but a tiny, dried foxglove blossom. I fled out the back door and into the woods, my heart hammering against my ribs. From the cover of the trees, I watched as a woman I didn't recognize, an elderly neighbor perhaps, used a key to let herself in to water the plants. It wasn't him. I was safe for now. As I drove back towards Portland, the stolen photo and the locket feeling like burning coals in my pocket, my phone rang. An unknown number. Hello. I answered, my voice wary. Cora. The voice was that of an older woman, crisp and familiar, though I couldn't place it. This is your Aunt Martha. My father's sister. A woman I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. A woman who had always kept a careful, deliberate distance. How did you get this number? That's not important, she said, her voice tight with an urgency that mirrored my own. I heard what happened to Lena. You need to listen to me. You have to stay away from your father. What he started, he will finish. What do you mean? Do you know what he did? I know more than you can imagine, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of years. I've been a coward for too long. Meet me. Tomorrow. The Waffle Window on Hawthorne. 10 a.m. The line went dead. The next morning, I met my aunt. Martha was a smaller, softer version of my father, her face a roadmap of sorrows I was only just beginning to understand. Detective Russo sat with me, his presence a quiet, solid reassurance. Martha didn't waste time with pleasantries. She reached into her handbag and placed the same photograph I had stolen on the table between us. You need to know about Rosalind, she said. My father had a twin sister, I stated, watching her face. Has Martha corrected, her voice trembling slightly. Rosalind is alive. She's been in a psychiatric facility for nearly 40 years. For what? Russo asked gently. Officially, for paranoid schizophrenia, Martha said, her voice laced with a lifetime of bitterness. Unofficially, for being my father's experiment. She explained that our grandfather, a pharmacist with tyrannical beliefs about family purity and strength, had used his children as test subjects for his homemade herbal remedies. Elias, the son and heir, was largely spared. Rosalind, the daughter, was not. He dosed her food with his concoctions for years, Martha whispered. Especially sweets, which were a rare treat, a tool for control. When she was 16, she finally had a complete psychotic break. She accused him of poisoning her. Of course, no one believed her. He was a pillar of the community. She was a hysterical girl. They locked her away and drugged her into silence. And my father? I asked, my blood running cold. Elias learned it all, Martha said, her eyes meeting mine, filled with a terrible apology. The herbs, the methods, the ideology. He saw what happened to Rosalind not as a tragedy, but as a failed experiment. She was weak. He believed he could perfect the process. He believed he could create a stronger, more resilient bloodline. A horrifying clarity began to dawn. My mother's sudden illnesses. My own childhood memories of being forced to eat bitter-tasting, special foods as punishment. It hadn't been discipline. It had been conditioning. My God, I breathed. He's been doing this our whole lives. He believes he is making you stronger, Martha said. He is testing you. When you left, when you defied him, you failed the test. The cookies, that was the final exam. And you, Cora, you were meant to be his masterpiece. The one who was strong enough to survive. That afternoon, Detective Russo got a call. The toxicology reports were back. The substance in the cookies and in Lena and Finn's bloodstreams was a massive dose of digitoxin, derived from the foxglove plant. The locket in my pocket felt heavy as lead. We have enough for a warrant, Russo said, his voice grim. We're going to pick him up now. But Elias was gone. His house was empty, his car missing. He had vanished. For 2 days, a manhunt ensued. For 2 days, I sat by Lena's bedside, watching her slow return to health, the guilt a constant, bitter companion. On the 3rd day, I returned to my apartment to find a single white lily on my doorstep, its petals just beginning to brown at the edges. A funeral flower. And then, Russo called again. We found him. Where? He checked himself into a motel near the Stillwater Psychiatric Facility, where his sister is. The final confrontation took place not in a sterile interrogation room, but in the visitor's lounge of the institution that had held his sister for 40 years. He was sitting calmly, reading a book, when we walked in. He looked up, and his smile was serene. Cora, he said, as if he'd been expecting me. You came. You passed the final test after all. You survived by proxy. Clever. It's over, Dad, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I finally understood the rules of his twisted game. To show fear was to show weakness. Over? He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. My dear girl, it's just beginning. I have finally purified the line. You are the culmination of my life's work. Strong. Resilient. A true sterling. He stood up, his eyes burning with a terrifying, messianic light. In his hand, he held a small, beautifully wrapped box. For you. A graduation present. I looked at the box, at the man who was my father, and for the first time, I felt not fear, but a profound and weary pity. He was a prisoner of his own making, trapped in a legacy of poison and control. I don't want it, I said, and the words were the truest I had ever spoken. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with Detective Russo, a silent, bewildered king in his crumbling, imaginary kingdom. 6 months have passed. Spring has come to Portland, washing the city in vibrant, improbable green. Elias is awaiting trial, his case a labyrinth of psychiatric evaluations and legal maneuvering. He writes me letters from prison, long, rambling manifestos filled with botanical drawings and talk of purity. I don't read them. I place them in a box, a testament to a sickness I can now see but no longer have to touch. Lena and Finn are healed, though the scars are not all visible. We are closer than ever, bound by the shared trauma and the fierce, protective love that bloomed in its wake. We are building a new family, one founded on honesty and trust, not on secrets and tests. I still live in my apartment by the river. The view is the same, but I see it differently now. I see the strength in the current, the resilience of the bridges that span the water, connecting one shore to the other. Last week, on a whim, I signed up for a beginner's baking class. The thought of it, the simple act of measuring flour and sugar, had terrified me for months. But I am learning that healing is not about avoiding the things that have hurt you. It's about reclaiming them. It's about taking the ingredients of your past, the bitter and the sweet, and learning to make something new, something that nourishes instead of poisons. This morning, I baked my first successful loaf of bread. It wasn't perfect. It was a little lopsided, a little too brown on one side. But as I sliced into it, the warm, honest smell filled my small kitchen. I took a bite. It was simple. It was wholesome. It tasted like a new beginning. My own.